All right, hello. This is Mr. Nolan, and I am going to give you a really kind of quick rundown in this screencast of how to talk about things like digestion and biosynthesis and cellular respiration, because I sensed in class today that we were a little bit lost, and so I'm just recording myself basically just saying all the same things that I said in class, but maybe it'll sort of resonate with you a little bit better through this medium. So we need to understand, in order for us to make sense out of organisms and how they survive and live, we need to make sense out of these three processes and sort of figure out how they're related in terms of their chemicals. So we have digestion, we have biosynthesis, we have cellular respiration. Digestion also goes by hydrolysis because that's really the main process by which digestion occurs. So I'm going to give you three examples in order to show, well, chemically, what's going on in terms of digestion, what's going on in terms of biosynthesis, and cellular respiration. What are all these chemicals doing, and why does this matter for us? So if we start with digestion, in the case of maybe your intestines, of what's going on in your intestines, let's go ahead and just kind of model this. So we're going to start out with a bunch of different chemicals inside of our intestines, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just kind of start with one. So we're just going to maybe pretend that we're dealing with carbohydrates. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some carbohydrates here. So carbohydrates come in sort of these chains. And so I have this chain of carbohydrates, and so I'm just going to call it carbs for short. So this is inside my intestine. So this is actually inside the intestine of my body. And my body, in order to use these carbs for energy and for other things, these carbs need to actually show up inside of my blood. And so your intestines are really responsible for bringing these nutrients into your blood. So this is your bloodstream. And we need to get these nutrients into that bloodstream. So if we look at this carbohydrate, it's way too big to fit either in the cells or between the cells to get to the bloodstream. So what our brilliant stomach and intestines do is they actually break this carb down into little pieces, into sugars. Sugars are still carbs, but they're very small. So these are sugars that our stomach and intestines has broken our carbs down into. Now, this is hydrolysis, right? Digestion involves hydrolysis. And hydrolysis, you can guess by the hydro that water's involved, and the lysis means we're breaking something down. So that's how we're breaking this carbohydrate down. We're adding water. So we're adding a bunch of water. This is sort of oversimplified, the way that I'm describing this, but we're adding water, and that water actually shows up inside our sugars. We have hydrogens and we have OHs. These are actually in there, right? They don't just disappear. You can't create or destroy matter. It's just, right? Those are actually in there. So we have broken down our carbs, and we need to get those across into our cell membrane. So now our intestinal cells do this really clever trick where they grab those sugars and they sort of throw them across into your blood, and now you have sugars in your blood. And remember, those sugars still have that hydrogen and OH that was kind of stuck on there in hydrolysis. It's kind of a minor detail, but it is important for understanding how do they actually get broken down. So this is hydrolysis. This is the main mechanism by which digestion occurs. And so now those cells that are in your bloodstream are available, or those chemicals in your bloodstream are available for other cells in your body. It's wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. We're going to sort of zoom ahead, and we're going to think about cellular respiration. What occurs in cellular respiration? So suppose that my carbohydrate has been broken down, and now I have those sugars, right, floating around in my blood. So this is your blood, and this is a muscle cell that needs to respire. Now you may recall that the main fuel source for muscle cells is sugar, or for any respiration, is sugar, right? It's that C6H12O6. And my muscle cells are going to use that sugar in order to get things done. That sugar contains chemical energy. And in order to do that, they're also going to need to burn up some oxygen. Some O2 is going to also come into those cells. Now these two are going to react. And inside our cells, they're going to react, and they're going to, for one thing, produce a bunch of energy. So my muscle cells are now producing energy, which they can use. And we're also producing some waste products. We're going to produce some water and some carbon dioxide. Now in class we talked about how to balance this. If we were to balance this properly, in order to get the right number of atoms on each side, we'd have to have 6 in front of the oxygen, water, and carbon dioxide in order to balance that out properly for sugar. So when sugar is actually digested and used in cellular respiration, we end up with 6 waters and 6 carbon dioxides, and it takes 6 oxygens to do that. One really important thing to remember here is that the cell doesn't gain mass. It loses just as much mass as it gains. So these 12 molecules that come out weigh exactly the same amount as the ones that came in. And so this cell does not gain mass. No mass gain. But it does gain energy. So this explains kind of how cellular respiration happens. There is no gain of mass. There is a gain of energy. So for our last part, let's go ahead and talk about what happens in other cells in the case of something like biosynthesis. What is going on here? So in biosynthesis, we are taking some molecules from in your blood, and these cells need to be able to produce new molecules with them. So in this case, let's pretend that you ate a steak, and that steak is made out of proteins, and those proteins were digested with hydrolysis, and you end up with amino acids. These amino acids floating around in your blood. You may recall that amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So in order for your cells, for these cells, in order to get anything out of your blood in terms of building themselves, in order to build new molecules, they actually need to absorb these amino acids. Now inside the cell, there are these brilliant little enzymes. And they will take these amino acids and they will actually build them into a chain. Now this chain is a protein. The cell has now created a protein for itself. But what we learned in class was that there is actually a waste product of this reaction, and that is water. Now the cell generally gets rid of that extra water. There's some specific chemistry that goes on here. Where we're looking at, when you have this amino group and this acid group, and when they combine together, you end up with water. So I could go in a little bit more detail with that if I had time. But the important thing here is to recognize that these cells, after they gain these amino acids, all these amino acids are going to enter these cells, and they build this protein. They lose a little bit of mass because of the water. Overall, the net gain of the cell actually increases in mass. So there is a gain in mass. The cells actually get heavier, and that's because they're building these proteins, and they're only losing a tiny bit of mass in the form of water. But overall, the cell actually gains mass by building these new proteins, these new chemicals. So how can we kind of summarize these ideas into just this diagram that I showed you earlier? Well, digestion or hydrolysis, where we began, where our body absorbs nutrients, H2O is added to these molecules in order to break them down. Cells are now able to absorb those nutrients, and these are a few examples of what that reaction looks like. We can turn our fat and our proteins and our carbs into smaller pieces. In biosynthesis, it's precisely the opposite. Amino acids or other things enter the cells, water is removed, and we can actually produce bigger molecules from that. The cell gains mass and grows. And then lastly, in order for our cells to get energy, we've got cellular respiration. You take oxygen, a fuel, you produce carbon dioxide and water. The cell gets energy, but the cell does not gain mass. So this is just kind of a summary of these.